Hi, welcome back. Today we will talk about the sign of control, of measuring the world, the sign of Virgo, which also happens to be my sun sign. This is the sign of everything that's measurable and controllable. Virgo starts with Epsilon as its first domicile, which in this case is not the identity of the Leonine, but rather the control and identification of oneself and every surrounding object, not to mention time itself. Epsilon rules time, measurable time at least, which no longer is in excess, so eternal, like we had in Leo, but rather now is measurable and under control. So this sign can control and measure time. Leo cannot, for Leo is always eternal. For Leo, time's a tyrant. For Virgo, it's not. It's a resource. The capacity to be equal to something else and oneself, most importantly, determines its capacity to produce and classify objects and people. This is the sign of classifying everything. The sign of Neptune forces the necessity for the object to be all equally the same epsilon, so we don't have the different. Thus we have clonation and mass production, and very strong distaste for anything different in this sign. For the undefined, for the uncontrollable, but not, and this is something a lot of people fail to, distaste for change. Virgo loves change, because it has Uranus in its rotation, which we will see in a second, and the sign, differently from Leo, only seeks to categorize and organize rather than enforce a code of being onto them, which is what Leo does, if you remember the last video. Uranus in its altation, as you can see, gives the capacity to Virgo to literally freeze time in the present. Uranus is the present, if you remember from my metaphysics video. Quite literally. This is the exaltation of the planet of Carpe Diem. The sign tries to freeze time by creating routines, partners of organization, in order to control the natural volatility of time and physical energy. You're going to exhaust your physical energy eventually. So if you lift weights, you can lift weights eternally. Eventually your arms are tired and you cannot do that. And that's the Mars in transparency here. So that we can freeze time and control physical energy. We freeze time via controlling physical energy. We put physical energy to control time. So the sign tries to make best use of each resource, which is, in this case, mostly time and physical energy. The moon exiled gives a distaste for childhood and for the feminine. This is not a feminine sign, this is a masculine sign. For childhood, motherhood, and laziness, those are the moon significations. If you remember, if you were alive, I was not, but the 60s, we had 60s at Pluto in Virgo, which made emerge all of the Virgo significations in rapid succession. So we start from the emergence and invention of birth control, which opposes the natural effect of sex, which is pregnancy. So from the 60s we can control birth rate, which collapsed birth rate right after the Pluto-Leo period of boomers, of a lot of people being born. Then we have technology that just massively progressed in the 60s, you know that. Industrialization that was pushed into every corner of the world. Mass expansion of bureaucracy because the sign likes to organize, and the relative welfare, at least here in Europe, there was a massive expansion of welfare. And the entering of women into the workforce, which is a very strong Virgo signification. work and the breaking of the feminine aspects. So the moon is fallen, the motherhood is fallen, the woman is no longer just a mother. And you know, if to work or to adhere to motherly duties is a question of for many modern women which have to choose, and like how the hell do you balance each other, which is like a very big theme in the 60s, and those are all very big themes in Virgo. This sign would be absolutely insufferable if it was not for Mercury's second domicile, you can see, which does a very important thing. It gives this sign its sarcasm and humorism, and it defines what the Virgo actually produces is the product itself, the small thing the Virgo wants to produce, the data it wants to produce. This is a sign of mental work. Not to mention the necessity to finally accelerate time after having frozen it and setting up all the patterns, all the stuff you have to do. To finally complete the work, Mercury allows for this time, after it has been frozen, to finally complete the work, Uranus's work, you know. But to mutate, and this is not the Mercury does not rule change itself. Change we already had in Uranus. This is the capacity to mutate, to get smaller and change form. So you know, very interesting aspect of history and technology in general is that the smaller technology is always better. Technology has this tendency to always get smaller. So the microprocessor replaced the processor, and so on. And every technology eventually just becomes smaller and smaller. And Mercury also has this capacity to make Virgos look eternally young, unless it's myths, like in my case with a Capricorn ascendant, so I really don't look that young. Jupiter exile, you see the Jupiter exile there, tells us another important thing. This sign does not believe in anything, hence the skepticism, the need for factual data, but it thinks, this sign thinks, in the most logical and different from Gemini. This is not theoretical thinking. This is purely practical to reality thinking. This is all practical. If it's not practical, it's not Virgo. All that is Virgo is coded to deal with reality and interact with it and be extremely practical. And this is the domiciles, you know. History-wise, we go to history now. One of my favorite sections of this video, honestly. After the Roman Empire dies, so Leo dies, the lion is slaughtered, we have something to deal with, which is the Neptune. There's the Piscean barbarians that try to get in the chaos that comes back. And you know what happens? The Roman Empire fragments. You have the West and the East. And we will talk about the East today. The West really fragments, so we're not going to talk about that. The East instead manages to flourish and increase its control. So the Byzantine Empire, which centralizes very, very much more than the Roman Empire ever did. And he uses a coin, if you want to see the signification being applied, uses a coin that remains stable and uninflated for almost 700 years. So it really lasts long. This empire lasted almost another 1,000 years, but this empire, different from the Roman, did not expand. This empire did not expand. This empire tried to control the barbarians from every side. And it restricted, it got smaller, and as it got smaller, it got more efficient. And you see, this is a Virgo empire. And you know what they did? They used a lot of bureaucracy. They reformed the Roman bureaucracy to the core. Epsilon and Neptune here had a fight for almost 150 years in the wars of iconoclasm. And those were the wars if to represent sacred icons, so we have Epsilon, the same, to represent reality, or to deny the representation of the same with the Neptune. But this is a Virgo empire, so who won? Iconographers won. The iconoclasts lost this massive conflict that spanned a very long time. So Epsilon, orthodoxy is very Virgo in that sense, since they literally kind of worship the icons. They have the cult of the icons. This empire is so Virgo that it almost outlasted the Roman Empire. It was a really stable point. It was mostly stable. And like they had a concept actually of maintaining taxis, which is order in Greek, that was very important for the whole duration of its existence. All the officials in the Byzantine Empire were cogs, interchangeable cogs in the machine. This empire ran mostly on merit and training, rather than prestige and ancestry, so the sun and moon of the Leo. This is not a patrician empire. I love this empire. They had a ridiculous amount of manuals and recorded every practice they did, pretty much. Every ritual, Orthodoxy as the liturgy, so the book, the manual, the Bible, which is a manual, as infallible and more authoritative than the priesthood. And they really don't do that much changing. So you see, there's another Virgo aspect in the Orthodox tradition. And like Justinian did the Corpus Juris Civilis, which is not a new set of law, but is rather a unified, practical, standardized set of laws, which has influence even today, since the West copied it. And it was to be considered as legal source in the empire. For the biblical times, I have everyone's favorite ancient spaceship builder, Noah. If there was to be a biblical figure for all those movies that you get about the world collapsing and we needed to escape in the galaxies for 1,000 years, that would be Noah. That's a Virgo dream, those movies, all the movies were made in the 60s or from people born in the 60s. This is a Virgo dream to escape the polluted and wait for it to die out. So what we have? We have Noah. Noah literally means rest or comfort. And this is the sign of work, and after you work you need to rest or you literally cannot work again. So the flood narrative symbolizes the service obtained via pure analytical obedience of the unblemished soul of Noah. So the Virgo quest for preservation, and like the Mercury for the detailed task, the product we want at the end. Disregarding the corruption and excesses of the Neptune and Jupiter at the other hand. So for a Virgo, I'm gonna make a video on this eventually, but for a Virgo the world feels like chaotic and uncontrollable. So the flood itself is this lunar, Neptunian endless water, moon rules water, Neptune rules chaos, So Noah with his mercurial Epsilonian precision follows every singular, meticulous, architectural and biological instruction that God gives him for the ark. Does not negotiate anything, does not contest anything, just executes and does the task humbly. So he's commanded to use specific measurements and he does so. He's not chosen for his greatness. This is not King David. This is not an ambitious king. This is just a worker, He's chosen for his integrity. So he lands on the nearly purified creation of on the mountain of Ararat. He sends those two birds to check if the flood has drained, to test that, that's also Virgo, to test if the work has been completed or not. And but then you have is the core tension of this man, the core eternal tension of the Virgo, which immediately after the flood rains, he plants a vineyard, he makes this vineyard and makes wine, of course, and he drinks the wine. And wine is Virgo, of course. September is when you harvest the grapes. He falls into a state of immoderation, and exposed vulnerability. He is naked. And this drunken episode symbolizes the fundamental flow of wanting to pursue this absolute perfection of behavior, this impeccability. That you can have momentary lapses of control over the senses, and which brings out the threat prior of chaos and exposure into this new purified world. So this lapse is handled by his sons that with discretion cover him up, and his decency is restored. Virgo does not want to lose his the decency, and when he loses, he wants it to be restored very quickly. He just tries to be this absolute moral perfectionist, not moral, but like balanced being, but like it backfires at the end. And the interesting part, another interesting part is that at the end of the flood, God uses a rainbow to mark the pact he's remaking with humans and every born creature with Noah. Everyone is saved after the purification. So after the Virgo purification, the sign of beauty and harmony is about to merge. So this is Libra. This is the allusion to Libra we're getting. And rainbows are very beautiful, of course. And we have this ingress into Libra in which the beauty is restored, and God promises to never flood the world again, which is the Saturn exalted, is the covenant, is the promise of the Saturnian law. Okay, let's get into sign's rulership. What does this sign rule? This sign rules hygiene. So Virgo has this very attentive care for self-care, for keeping the body healthy. Organization, Virgo is an organization sign. Machines, all sorts of machines. Anything that inputs something and produces something can be considered a machine. And the more machines you have, the more obsessed they get with it. I guarantee this personally. Mass production, this is the sign of mass production. Producing the same thing with a code, with a standard for the masses. So we have the 60s, Work, this is the sign of work, of course. You have the Mars, which is recovered to have the energy to work again, and Uranus to freeze time, to freeze the routine, to have this routine and just repeat the same action over again. Regularity, this sign with the Epsilon does not like the diverse. This is the sign that wants to be considered normal, I personally don't, because I have a lot of Pisces placements which are opposite my Virgo aspect. So don't take this verbatim. Take it with a grain of salt, of course. Routine, the sign rules routine, of course. I already told about this. Service, this sign is a great sign of service. This is the sign of being of service to the others, to the collective, to the tribe, to anyone which needs it. This is very humble sign, Health, this is more preventive, the type of health, the magic pills, the panacea. So like the pills, which is a product, of course. This is not your surgeon. Surgeon is more Capricorn, This sign rules manuals. This sign wants to categorize everything. So what better than to write books onto how to do stuff? irony, this sign is very sarcastic and ironic, this sign is very strong humorism. It makes it terrible with the Mercury second domicile, which is actually the result. So Virgo does this big work, and then sometimes it just realizes it's just a big joke, and it can't take it, and it takes it lightly actually, because the Mercury gives this lightness to the Mercurial, to the Virgoan temperament. So Virgo actually takes life a bit more lightly than you might think. That's what sarcasm's for, This is the sign that rules the finite and measurable. Of course, precision, this sign rules precision. It wants to be very precise, details. This sign is very dispersive, like every mutable sign is very dispersive. The sign that gets its dispersion on details, it focuses too much on details and it creates confusion. Clocks, this sign rules clocks, of course, we can measure time. Anything that measures time, actually. Switzerland, of course, so who makes the best clocks, and like clocks in general? Switzerland. So Switzerland is ruled by Virgo, of course. And if you look at the Swiss lifestyle, it's very Virgoan. Conservation, this sign rules conserving stuff for the future. You get the harvest in August, and you need to be ready for winter, so you're gonna make food preserves. This sign rules thinking very differently from Gemini. This is not a theory sign. This is a practical, tried and tested type of thinking. Analytical thinking. It usually analyzes stuff that already happened. Names. This sign loves to give names. And this is very important because in the past, in ancient times, names are actually associated to have magical values. And I personally believe this, so yes. And names basically are those spells that should represent the whole life of the person who is getting named. For the body, Virgo rules the hands. Craftsmanship. You need good hand movement. To make pottery, you need good hand movement. All sorts of stuff that you make with the hands, it's Virgo. Because, Uranus rules the hands. This sign, I do believe, rules the Neocortex. I'm not sure, still we've not tested this enough, but this sign likes to think, so it rules something in the end. That's something we can just be sure of. And to end this, to fight against death, is the secret ambition of the Virgo. And to fight against death is to refuse life. So Virgo contains this very deep disdain of life, very, very deep inside, which is kind of scary, And this sign rules, deals with the infinite by mastering and controlling a very small section of reality to ensure survival and cyclical control, So it can just go with the changes of the Uranus exalted. Little tips to deal with Virgos is that the sign has Mars in transparence. Don't underrate this placement. This sign has more energy than you think. And it wants to act more than it wants to do anything else. It rarely enjoys itself, but when it does so, it does in balance, in temperance. It avoids the excessive asceticism of the Capricorn, but is not a Venusian sign like a Taurus, of course, so it keeps this balance. And it's very selective on what it likes. So it's very selective. So, I will remind you now that if not for the control the Virgos apply on reality, surviving on this mess will be impossible. The sign is considered cold, it really is not. But it gets all the worst jobs and has to do them humbly. This is the only sign that will actually just criticize itself for criticizing itself. So if you want a good and long-lasting relationship with any Virgo, avoid being harsh on them and criticism. Don't criticize them, they don't react very well to that. And it might actually backfire because they then start criticizing themselves. So this sign's very methodical, you know, this sign's very smart, of course. But this is not as cold as you might think. This sign is actually very committal in certain types of situations. This sign is actually, since it does actually usually confine both Leo, so the sign of passion, it has a lot of passion usually. It's just like a early Virgo. And if it is a late Virgo, it has the Venusian aspect, so it's actually very coded to really enjoy as well, you know. So this sign is actually very much less cold than you might actually think. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was interesting. See you next time.